December 14th, 1962. Seven shots are fired at the Wimpole Mews flat of Dr. Stephen Ward. That night on BBC News, Michael Aspel reads this story.
After an incident in Wimpole Mews, West London this morning, when a man was reported to have leapt from a minicab and fired shots towards the building, a 30-year-old West Indian was tonight charged with shooting with intent to murder Miss Christine Margaret Keeler.
Before I fired those shots, right, the McKellern government was an institution like this government, right? And there's no way that Harold Wilson or any other opposition was going to get them out unless there was something really drastic that happened.
Whitsun, 1963. Profumo is politically dead. I misled you and my colleagues in the House. I cannot remain a member of your administration, nor of the House of Commons.
Let's recognize it what it is, a scandal. A great party is not to be brought down because of a squalid affair between a woman of easy virtue and a proved liar.
Minister of War, Mr. Profumo, came to have a look round.
Are you going to make any comment at all?
No, no comment.
In the Britain of the 60s, is the lie or the adultery the greater offence?
Things were never quite as out of control for the establishment in this country as they were for about 3 or 4 months in the middle of 1963.
Mr. Profumo was unfortunate. He made a mistake. He suffered quite enough.
Cut. Okay, thanks. Now, I'd heard the names Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice-Davis and John Profumo, but I'd never heard of this chap, Stephen Ward, ever.
I'd known Jack Profumo for about 7 years.
That was the week that was.
It's about politics, sex, espionage. More importantly than that, I mean, this to me is a major event in British history.
This week, Palace Pictures release a new film, Scandal, based on the sensational revelations of 1963 that became known as the Profumo Affair. 10 years in preparation, it's the first screen account of the story to see the light of day in 25 years. So in tonight's special media show, we look again at the story that kicked off the 60s and at how Fleet Street sold and TV satirised the scandal to the nation, and ask whether new doubts about the official version of the events is the reason why it's taken so long to tell the story again.
I think that the picture should not be distorted by the media. The picture should be properly given and presented to history. And that is the picture which I portrayed in my report. It's the picture which those all these years afterwards are trying to distort.
Lord Denning's report is the last official word on the scandal that rocked the British establishment. He told how the Minister for War, John Profumo, and an urbane Russian diplomat, Eugene Ivanov, had shared the sexual favours of an 18-year-old model and showgirl, Christine Keeler. How a Dr. Stephen Ward, in whose flat Christine had entertained the pair, had brought them all together. And how rumours of promiscuity in high society, and of spying, forced Profumo to lie and finally resign from the Cabinet and Parliament. But had Denning been told the full story? Did the Security Service know of the affair nearly 2 years before the scandal broke and deny it? And why was it necessary to portray Stephen Ward as utterly immoral and a communist sympathiser?
Stephen made a particular mistake, you see. I mean, his mistake was that there were an awful lot of people at that time who were behaving just as naughtily and just as abandonedly and having a whale of a time. But they were not connecting themselves with the establishment.
People have a very fixed idea about the women involved, and they don't really know the whole story. And the main angle of the film uncovers all that and actually shows what really happened, and they weren't just prostitutes or whores, that they were actually real people, and they were terribly young, and they were involved in it was a bigger circle than people imagine.
She's incredibly optimistic. She's not at all cynical. She has a sense of humor about everything. And she really kind of looks on everything like there's nothing that's too great that she can't overcome. And that's what makes her a survivor in the end, whereas it's more difficult for Christine because Mandy just kind of rises above everything.
Well, I suppose it really goes back to seeing Christine on television when I was a kid and seeing her come out of the Old Bailey and see all this crowd of old grannies banging at her with their handbags and screaming, "Burn her!" And I sat there and I thought, like, is this a witch, this beautiful girl? You know, and I was more or less in love with Bridget, but I sort of made room for Christine from that point on, and I suppose I've been in love with her all my life. What happened was I said to Joe Boyd, who's the producer here, we should do the Christine Keeler thing.
I said to him, well, I'll go down to the library. There must be some book. I'm sure there's a book that kind of tells the whole story, and we can option the rights to that book, and that'll sort of get us off to the right start. And I went down to the London Library, and I looked through the card catalogue. And this was before Christine's book or any of the subsequent books have been published. And I realized, to my absolute amazement, that there had not been a book since 1963, that the last books that covered the subject in any kind of overview were the Sunday Times Insight Team book from 1963 and the Wayland Young and the books that had been written at that time. And I said to myself, the British don't want to know this story, do they? But I'm going to tell them.
It's witchcraft.
I felt that you could do this story on television. This story was just absolutely made for television. It's a real... I've always felt that stories about real people should be on television. It's a news story. It's about news. That's what TV does best.
And I've got no defense for it.
Much to our surprise, our first real deal was at the BBC. And the BBC developed the project with us. But again, when it came to giving it the go-ahead and actually funding it for production, there was resistance. And I can't really say why. One can only surmise. But the project was not approved and went into turnaround and came back to us.
The heat is too intense for it.
This was the time of when Alistair Milne was getting the sack and the Real Lives thing was on and the BBC was coming under a lot of heat and everybody was panicking and they were moving in all these heavy new executives and governors and so forth. So the BBC was running rather scared at the time.
What good would common sense for it do?
And there followed various other conversations with other ITV companies and Channel 4, and we were actually at one point told that the IBA had said this was not really a suitable subject for a drama documentary and advised its member companies not to pursue the subject.
And although I know it's strictly taboo,
other television companies like Central and Thames TV were also not immune from the all-embracing spell.
Hugh Whitemore was researching the whole project, was very keen to do it. And his title for it was A Thoroughly Filthy Fellow, which was another of the glorious phrases used to describe Stephen Ward. So we kept the working title as A Thoroughly Filthy Fellow. It was discussed at board meetings of the parent company, and we had development money for it. We even had it slated as to an approximate time we go into production on it. Then Hugh had to go off to Los Angeles to write a film, and we were very keen to keep this energy going. So he said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to write it or not, but get someone else, use all my research. And because I'm actually quite straight about these things, I changed the title, because it was Hugh's title, to The Stephen Ward Affair. Well, it disappeared. From that moment on, it was discussed at the next board meeting, and it was sort of Tipp-X'd out of life. I mean, it just didn't exist anymore. And Brian Cowgill rang me and just said, it's not happening. I said, why? He said, I don't know, but it's not happening.
The unsatisfactory answer is that no explanation was ever forthcoming. And the nature of the establishment is not to volunteer explanations as to its distaste for matters of this nature. They don't say anything, they just do it. Or don't do it, I should say.
'Cause it's witchcraft.
Our final last throw of the dice was with Maxwell, with the Mirror Group, and they had set up a satellite deal, and I think he still owns one of the satellites. And they were going to make it then, and we really got very, very, very close to making it, and it just suddenly didn't happen. And it's like, really, at that point, I lost my temper. I just said, look, fuck it, we're going to either make this or we're not. So let's forget the miniseries, let's get it done as a movie, and let's just get on with it.
Steve, who had probably from the first day wanted to make a feature film and not a television thing anyway, said, well, it's easy to make a feature, and so we made the feature. And that was really always my second best alternative, you know, just because you had to leave out so much and you had to change the focus of the thing specifically. And so a lot of what we know and a lot of some of the, perhaps the hottest stuff can't find its way into the feature. The movie ends up being a private story of a public event. If you're looking at a film, and if you're looking at the relationship that really matters in the film, where the heart of the film is and where the heart of the story is in the relationship between Stephen and Christine.
Coconuts and fish right by the sea, her rose in her hair and gleam in her eye and love in her heart for me.
I was working as a waitress in a Greek restaurant, and a dancer from Murray's came in, and of course she was very beautiful. And she said to go along to Murray's, and I had some ballet dancing. I did do some ballet when I was smaller, and so I went, but it wasn't because of my dancing. I was just literally a showgirl.
Who wouldn't willingly swap jobs with the glamour girls who dance the night away in one of the lushier nightclubs? Nice work. But who'd get up at 10 o'clock on the morning after to rehearse a new routine? Frankly, it's a tough life. So the girls from London's Cabaret Club go out to a country house near Guildford in Surrey at regular intervals for much-needed relaxation in the open air, a stately rest home for dancers.
I felt at home because all the other girls, I felt at last I belonged somewhere, because I didn't get on with my stepfather at home. And I loved Murray's, just with the girls, and it was like being at boarding school in many ways.
Murray's was the town businessman place, right? Stephen would go in there as a wild card, right? And he would sort of console the girls about what they were doing, you know. He'd be their friend, not the wicked businessman sort of taking them out or wanting to give them a quick one, you know, in the Strand Palace or the Cumberland. He was the one that would want to, if they were really lovely, like Christine, to draw them, to tell them to be, you know, that they could, if they spoke differently, if they dressed smartly, they could be introduced to high society.
Let's introduce a London osteopath who, after reaching the top of his profession, decided he'd like to conquer another field. These talented hands belong to Dr. Stephen Ward.
He practiced as an osteopath. Through being an osteopath, and a very good one, he knew judges, he knew members of Parliament, he looked after Winston Churchill, and through his drawing and his pretensions, and I think he was a fair illustrator, if not an artist, he told me he earned 1,500 in that year for his drawings, and from his being an osteopath, he earned perhaps 5,000. And that's what he earned. He lived extremely well.
He was perhaps a little bit ahead of his time, actually. Certainly he was a sexually intrigued man, one way or another, but he certainly wasn't a Pons. In any sense. He loved women. He adored them.
Stephen, you're such a tease.
What Stephen knew was he was an encyclopedia of the lusts, the deviations of the establishment of England, really, because that was his, he found it was a hobby of his to collect not only gossip but happenings and so forth. So he knew better than most people the sort of thing that went on and where it went on and who were the people involved.
Well,
all hands on deck.
I'll just put a record on. Aye, aye, Captain.
Wait your lips.
What Stephen Ward was somebody who was a sort of class traitor and a class rebel, who basically wanted to know everybody and be everybody, and travel up and down that elevator. And in the end, I guess you can't do that, and it's just too rigged. And that's probably what the crime he committed was, a crime against class.
Cliveden, the Buckinghamshire home of the Astor family. Lord and Lady Astor, formerly the model Bronwyn Pugh, had made available to Stephen Ward an idyllic cottage on the banks of the Thames and at the foot of the Cliveden estate.
There was an understanding between Astor and Stephen that although he let him have this lovely cottage next door to the great house of Cliveden on the Thames, where the heads of state used to go down and be entertained, that the bridge between the two would be that swimming pool, which he could have the use of, and that he was expected to bring lovely girls. And of course, one of them he brought down, of course, was Christine on that fateful night.
Grandmother would wear. Come on, let's wrap it up. Oh, baby.
What's that? What's what? I heard a laugh. Laugh.
Splendid, girl! Christine beat John Profumo, Minister for War.
War Minister Profumo hadn't been...
John Profumo came from a wealthy and well-connected family and became Minister for War in 1960. Already tipped as a future Prime Minister, he'd added glamour to his tough image with the marriage to actress Valerie Hobson 6 years earlier.
There is a streak in British people, and this is looking at it kindly, I think, who think that this simply isn't fair play, that somehow it's just not cricket to make, they don't even say Profumo so much as Mrs. Profumo, live through this all over again.
In 1975, Profumo was awarded the CBE in recognition of his charitable works in the East End of London, to which he's devoted himself since his withdrawal from public life.
When I've had letters saying you should be ashamed of yourself for bringing up the past of a man who's surely paid his debt to society, is the usual phrase, I have to remember that they haven't read the script. In the end, I thought, and this is a judgment I've made, which other people may not agree with, that the themes that were brought up were, in the end, more important than the comfort and the privacy of one man's life.
You have never made love until you've made love in a gondola.
I'm glad you. Shall we move on?
I remember a rowing boat once. Never a gondola.
Hello, you two. Afraid I can't take you home tonight. I've got a slow puncture.
Oh.
I've asked Eugene to take you.
An unlikely figure on the fringe was Eugene Ivanov, who constantly visited Ward's cottage and who frequently joined the large weekend bathing parties at the Cliveden pool. Ivanov's arrival on the Cliveden scene, as everyone now knows, sowed the seeds of the biggest political scandal this century.
Those days of
The day that I met Jack Profumo was, in fact, the day that I came back and jumped into bed for the first and only time with Ivanov. Don't ask me why I did that, but anyway, there you are. We've got a bottle of vodka and got so sloshed.
Why don't you come up and have a cup of tea?
Tea. In Russia, we drink vodka.
The unique thing about Christine, the thing that made her uniquely, narcotically appealing to men, was that she was just so willing. She was just so absolutely yours. What drove them mad was at the moment the door closed, she was equally absolutely someone else's. And that's why men did these mad things for her, you know.
I'm going to be all yours, Jack. Whenever you want me.
I wonder for how long?
It was a very short affair.
When I'm gone?
Didn't last longer than 6 weeks the most. To 8 weeks the very most. By the end of August, I never saw Jack Profumo again.
Doctor, I'm in trouble.
Well, goodness gracious me.
For every time a certain man is standing next to me, a flash comes to my face and my pulse begins to race. It goes boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, 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 boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom.
Well, goodness gracious me. How often does this happen? When did the trouble start? You see,
So the explosive mixture of the model, the war minister and the Russian spy was primed, but would not go off for another 18 months.
Come on, baby, let's do the twist. Come on, baby.
It was manned spaceflight, confrontation over Cuba and civil rights that filled the pages of the press. And at home, the rigid conformity of British society was breaking down with the arrival of more relaxed moral values.
Stephen thought it was excitement to drive round Notting Hill Gate. And I went with him and this other friend who we were taking out for the evening. And we decided, or they decided, because I didn't think I even knew about the stuff in those days, to have a smoke. And so I was sent to go and get some because they both looked like policemen.
You all right, sister? You looking for something?
I'm with some people in the car, and they thought, well, they wondered. They thought there might be some pot about.
Pot?
No.
Yeah.
I think she's got it. What's it like? Pot? No idea. Stiff pins, I suppose.
But it was Ward's thirst for danger that would lead to his loss of control, first of Christine, and before long of his entire social world.
Go to a party.
What, right now?
Right now, man. The sound system.
I think in a way that is what really appealed to me, is the high and low of the story. The broad spectrum of British class, like a knife cutting right through the cake of British society.
The thing about Mandy, Christine and Stephen is they were rebels at their time. They were crossing the barriers that society had put up. You know, they were going from Notting Hill on to the palace. And you know, that's why it's an extraordinary story, and that's why I think the relevance it's a very relevant story for now, because those barriers are there more than ever.
You know, we didn't make this up. You know, this happened, really. And it has the lack of logic that life has. That's what I liked about when I finally saw the film, was that it behaved in a way that films don't. People did things unpredictably in the way that they don't in films, purely because that's what they did. And they did lead chaotic lives, and Christine in particular led a life of almost daily chaos.
It was Christine's attempt to disentangle herself from the jealous rivalry of two black lovers, Lucky Gordon and Johnny Edgecombe, that lit the fuse and brought the party to an end right on Ward's doorstep.
After an incident in Wimpole Mews, West London this morning, a 30-year-old West Indian was tonight charged with shooting with intent to murder Miss Christine Margaret Keeler.
Minicab, I got her one of those Renault Dauphine minicab. The guy pulled up over there, wait for me, and I knock on the door, and Mandy looked out the window. So I said, "Is Christine there?" She says, "No." I said, "Don't give me that bullshit." I said, "I just talked to her." "No, she's there." So eventually, Christine, she came to the window, and I said, "Look, come on down and talk to me. You know, like, don't treat me like a goddamn salesman. Like, after all, we've been having the thing, and yeah."
Johnny,
Open the door for me now.
you must go away. You'll get into trouble.
Open this door, I got a taxi waiting.
Johnny, please.
Christine, Lucky Gordon, him after me. I'm gonna kill me. I got nowhere to go.
I can't.
And then she threw a pan out the window and said, "Here you are." And that sort of flipped me out, because I was angry already. And then I just pull out the shooter, and I start shooting the lock like they do in the movies.
Oh, Dr. Ward, I just thought you should know. There's a black man shooting at your front door.
It's very kind of you to call.
The shooting was in December, but I'd met Profumo 18 months before that, in June or July of '61. So if the shooting hadn't have happened, nothing would ever have come out.
Isn't that the girl we saw at Clifton? You know, the one by the pool.
Is it?
You must remember.
Yes.
Christine something. Sure, it's her.
Keeler.
Isn't that...
Yes, it is.
Well, that's torn it.
Johnny Edgecombe was arrested for attempted murder, and Christine was to be the main witness.
You got your gumboots on? Why?
Why? Because the shit's deep. Never mind your little West End shoot 'em up. Run that tomorrow. Say West Indian held in West End shooting. Use a nice big picture. That'll make him sit up.
Yeah. But listen, that's not the half of it. If what this tart has just told me is true, then we are sitting on dynamite.
The press scented that a much bigger story might emerge if Christine were to start naming names at Johnny Edgecombe's trial.
Yeah. It's all right, great. Yeah, I thought you'd like that.
Get her to sign or something.
Kevin, you hear me? She must sign something. Yeah, not grab money, anything. Just get her signed.
All right, Governor, we'll do. I'll be there later.
I think that if Christine hadn't been seen to be someone who was involved with black men, the story wouldn't have had the impact. It wouldn't have quite excited people in a way that they couldn't quite define, and it wouldn't have tarred Profumo in quite the same way.
She must be stopped. She's talking to everybody.
Yes, if it's a matter of money. What Christine needs is a holiday. Bit of sun on her back, somewhere quiet, Spain, Portugal. That's what she needs. Yes, just the job where the world of good.
Despite speculation at the time, Lord Denning's later report found no evidence of a conspiracy to remove Christine from the limelight. But her disappearance to Spain and absence from the Edgecombe trial prompted fresh rumours and questions in the Commons from Labour MP George Wigg.
That what I said in the House of Commons the other night could be regarded as sensational. My motive here was to bring to light certain facts which were being talked about right, left and centre, and it arose in my case from an interest in security, and I think there were certain aspects of the rumours about which there ought to be statements.
Friday, March 22nd, 1963. At 11 a.m. in the House of Commons, Mr. John Profumo makes a personal statement. Miss Keeler and I were on friendly terms. There was no impropriety whatsoever in my acquaintanceship with Miss Keeler.
But not as pleased as one
Any comment at all?
No, no comment.
The rain in Spain sent Christine home again. That was the week that was.
It was a great godsend. I mean, in a way, it was a kind of climax to the whole anti-McKellern campaign. I mean, the satire boom was really very much based as a kind of personal attack on McKellern, who'd been Prime Minister for a long time and had developed into this sort of almost caricature figure with his moustache and languid voice and everything. And he was a kind of focus for mimics and all this kind of thing. And then there was a series of little spy scandals and Home Office scandals. And this big sort of sex scandal came as the kind of culminating blow.
In all, it's been an interesting and exciting life, and although I'm temporarily broke, I'm sure that one day my luck will turn again. Especially with all the information I'm ready to spill if it doesn't.
When I was in Spain, the Express got hold of me, and literally the British consul had said that was the only way I'd get back, by plane. But I admit that I did tell them. There was 13 reporters in the room, and Profumo had denied it, and I denied it too. But they said to me, "But it's true, isn't it, Christine, you know?" And I admit I did say yes, it was true. That was my bad bit.
You see, immediately it blew up. He issued 2 writs against foreign papers, because of course the foreign press wasn't under the same restrictions as the British press. And I think they paid him money. So that was a kind of warning to the British press. Well, don't try this on with me, because, you know, I've issued writs.
And if Private Eye prints a picture of me on a bed, I'll sue them.
The point that was made at the time, and still ought to be made, was that Profumo's offence was not that he'd had a little fling with Christine Keeler. It was that he got up in the House of Commons and denied it. I mean, it was the old business of the cover-up, which is the basis of, I mean, all good scandals. There must be a cover-up element.
Did he ever write letters?
Maybe a couple of notes.
Notes? You kept them, did you?
I may have put them away somewhere. It was months ago.
He wrote me 2 or 3 letters, 2 letters before that actually, but the letter which I actually gave to the press was the last letter he wrote, and in fact I never saw him after that, and that was in August of '61.
Darling, in great haste and because I can get no reply from your phone. Alas, something's blown up tomorrow night and I can't therefore make it. I'm terribly sorry, especially as I have to leave the next day for various trips and then a holiday, so won't be able to see you again until sometime in September. Blast it. Please take great care of yourself and don't run away. Love, Jay.
The letters were not of a deeply compromising nature or anything like that.
From who to who?
They were from Mr. Profumo to Miss Keeler.
Mm-hmm.
And I took steps to remove these letters, one of which had been sold to a newspaper at a time when the involvement of Mr. Profumo was completely unknown to the public.
Why did you do that?
He was a friend. I felt it was the least I could do under the circumstances.
They didn't print my story. They printed a story by Stephen instead. And so I went away with nothing.
I exchanged an article in a newspaper for this letter, and only for money was sufficient to cover the legal expenses to which I'd been put in this matter.
You weren't in any way selling your story?
No, indeed not. I didn't profit at all by this. In fact, I think I could have said to have stuck my neck out to have helped Mr. Profumo in this matter. The letter was returned to my solicitor and thence to Mr. Profumo. And for a while, it did seem possible that Mr. Profumo's part in this affair could have been concealed altogether.
I remember saying to him, well, you know, is Profumo telling the truth when he denies any affair? And Ward said, oh yes, absolutely. So that his initial instinct was to rally behind Profumo and take part in the cover-up.
What has happened since March?
A most amazing state of affairs. First thing that I became aware of was the fact that my patients and friends were being questioned by the police with a certain line of questioning, which disturbed me very deeply.
What do you mean by a certain line of questioning?
Broadly this. The line seemed to be to indicate that I'd somehow been living on immoral earnings or having introduced people to men for money.
Running a call girl racket?
Well, there are questions in Parliament led me to believe that this could be so.
224, take 2.
And action.
You have such a wide variety of friends. I'm on trial by hearsay. You see, I don't think I quite understand what you're getting at. Call off the dogs. If the police persist in ruining my reputation, destroying my livelihood, badgering my friends, and digging up women that I haven't seen for years, then I have no choice but to defend myself. Well, in the first place, Dr. Ward, I need hardly remind you that the police are not under the jurisdiction of the Conservative Party. They go about their business as they see fit. I'm in no position to call them off. You leave me no alternative. And in the second place, Dr. Ward, it would appear that you are proposing to blackmail the government. Now, I must tell you that that would be most unwise. I've always been a very good friend to Jack Profumo. I like to think that I'm loyal to my friends, and that my friends are loyal to me. Yes, I hope they are, Doctor, because you're going to need all the friends you can get.
Cut. Cut that one.
130.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Increasingly isolated, Ward sent a letter to the press saying Profumo's statement to the House was untrue. Further questions were raised in Parliament and Profumo hurried back from holiday.
From his home in Chester Terrace, he writes to the Prime Minister, "I misled you and my colleagues in the House. I cannot remain a member of your administration, nor of the House of Commons."
Listen, do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? Whoa, whoa, closer.
The resignation was the green light for Fleet Street editors to finally print the stories they'd been sitting on for months for fear of libel.
I'm in love with you.
From Gleneagles, where he is playing golf, the Prime Minister returns to face the growing crisis. A week goes by before a minister speaks out on what has happened.
Of course there's a security problem. That is silly. A Secretary of State for War can't have a woman shared with a spy, or if he was a spy, without giving rise to a security risk. The question is not whether there was a security risk, but whether there was an actual breach of security. Be sensible.
Wilson very cleverly ignored the issue of whether Profumo was rooting Christine and said that what was the problem here was that it was the security issue, that somehow Christine was going to pump Profumo, imagine this, for state secrets and then pass them on to Ivanov. This was never really likely to happen, but this is strictly and scrupulously what Wilson concentrated on.
We, for our part, have never had any part in these rumours. We haven't peddled them. We certainly didn't originate them. I haven't heard them even peddled in private. But we have, of course, complained throughout about the danger to our security.
2 days after Profumo's resignation, public attention was diverted from the political crisis by the arrest of Stephen Ward on immoral earnings charges.
When Ward was arrested, he said, "Oh my God, how dreadful. I shall deny it. Nobody will come forward to say it's true." The man who made the arrest, Chief Inspector Samuel Herbert, who's bareheaded here, said his inquiries would take another 2 or 3 weeks. And I have it on very good information that at a meeting that was held in early 1963, the Home Secretary, Henry Brooke, said at this meeting, somebody must be responsible for all this. So the word got around that the government wants a scapegoat in this case. The Commissioner of Police was present at this meeting, and he thought, well, maybe there is something we can charge Ward with. Maybe Ward is guilty of breach of the Official Secrets Act. And he looked at that, and there was nothing there. And then he looked, he asked around the police in Ward's own area, Marylebone, and there on file at Marylebone Police Station was a lot of anonymous complaints that Ward had been running a call girl racket. Now that was untrue. Untrue in the sense that you imagine a call girl racket to be providing girls for money. Ward didn't provide girls for money. Ward introduced willing young ladies to gentlemen who were interested in them.
somebody had to carry the can for the embarrassment the government felt. It was the vengeful way in which they went for him that I can't help feeling was criminal.
Well, Inspector Herbert and Sergeant Burrows at the time, wasn't it? I met them both, and they confessed to me, and I wish I were on oath for this, that they did not know what they were looking for. And they were pressed and pressed and pressed by the authorities to go on and go on. And they were really ordinary Mr. Plods, you know, in civilian clothes, trying to do a job. And here was a job which employed the Secretary of State for War, the Prime Minister was involved, there were a Russian agent supposedly, and murmurs of royalty in the background. And it worried them. It was outside their normal terms of reference. And what were they looking for?
It was not normal police procedure. Up to that time, investigations into a pimping case or a procuring case would involve 1 or 2 officers for 5 days, 6 days. If they didn't have the evidence by the end of that time, mainly through surveillance, then they gave it up and thought, well, we'll get that guy another time. But in this case, there were 5 officers working a lot of overtime, spending something like 6 weeks to 2 months doing the investigation and interviewing a total of over 140 witnesses, some of them 14, 15 times. That's just an indication of their determination that they should actually get Ward and get a conviction.
You stink, Ward. You're a stinking little ponce. And I'll get 147 people say the same. 147. And you'd be amazed at some of the people we've dug up. Real filth. Hey, John? Real pox-ridden harlots. Oh, dear. Look at that.
What we can't do is show the whole trial. Now, in the trial, the police produced these witnesses, and these women got up and told a lot of lies, which they later retracted. But it made it look very bad for Stephen. I would like to have had time to have those extra witnesses in the picture. Otherwise, the trial scene in the film, or the excerpts from the trial that exist in the film, are the very words that people spoke.
He's acquitted.
Are you still friendly with him?
No. But I know what it's like in jail.
Mr. Badge, are you aware that Lord Astor denies any impropriety in his acquaintanceship with you?
Well, he would, wouldn't he?
The trial was conducted by a hostile judge. It doesn't mean to say the judge was corrupt or anything like that. He was just hostile to Ward.
Did you ever introduce girls to Dr. Ward?
Yes, I did.
You say you were...
He thought Ward was a morally reprehensible, dirty fellow. And when the prosecuting attorney, taking advantage of the judge's view, pushed this view that that's what sort of person Ward was, that even if he wasn't guilty of a criminal offence, he was certainly guilty of moral offences, the court became one of morals, and it tried Ward on morals charges, not on criminal charges.
He was left pretty much without a friend in the world. I guess because they'd all enjoyed, you know, the benefits of his acquaintance and what came with it, and they didn't want to see their names in the papers.
And nobody really wanted to be involved with it, and they definitely didn't want to get dragged through the courts. So he got dropped. He just got dropped. What it says about it is more, I think, more than a political statement, is a human statement. That often people just simply don't have the courage of their own convictions or the courage of their own behaviour. And if it looks uncomfortable, they'll drop you. It's a sadness about our race.
This is not fair. Mr. Badge.
Beg your pardon, my lord.
Stephen Ward was a sinner, but that is not a crime. there's a difference between sin and crime, and he was convicted as a criminal for something he didn't do, and driven to his death. And there's no way in the world that I can't feel sympathetic, you know. And here's a guy who was hounded to his death for doing nothing wrong.
The night before the verdict was delivered, Ward took an overdose of sleeping pills.
If they had arrested Stephen for spying, he probably wouldn't have committed suicide. But because they arrested him for pouncing, which is something he didn't do, it was just too much for him to bear.
What really killed Steve was he was an incurable snob. And the idea that the Nobs, the Astors, and the people, the royal family, you see, I mean, he'd drawn them all. The Queen Mother, the Prince Philip, I think the present Queen, he'd drawn Princess Marina, all of them had posed for him. And many other people, distinguished people. All this was going to go, and this meant everything to him, more than anything else. That sort of recognition, that social thing was going to go. And what would he be afterwards?
Profumo is ruined. Ivanov is back in Russia. And Miss Keeler is collecting £30,000 plus for her memoirs.
Calling Christine Keeler, £500. Calling Christine Keeler, £1,000. Calling Christine Keeler, £2,000. Calling Christine Keeler, £3,000. Calling Christine Keeler, £3,000. Go to the Daily Express.
Quite honestly, I wasn't sorry. I knew that I could sell my story to the News of the World for a lot of money if Jack Profumo had resigned. And I must admit, by then I didn't really care, and I was pleased to get the money.
I'm old enough for them to put me in papers, put me in trials, be arrested, so I might just well be old enough to write my own book.
What are you going to tell us in this book that we don't know already about you?
Well, lots of men that I met in my life that you haven't heard of, friends.
Well, now you're a great one for the unexpected. What can we expect from you next?
Well, you never know.
I think it was the Profumo situation and the payment of £25,000 to Christine. And no doubt that there was there were other monies paid by other papers and possibly the News of the World to other people involved in it. Was the advent of big payments, yeah. I mean, I'm certain that other payments had been made to a lesser degree earlier on. But Fleet Street, I think, then realised that if there was a good story going, the finest and fastest way of making sure that your rivals didn't get it and you did was to come to an agreement with the person concerned. If they had a good story to sell, you would buy it. You would then check out that the story was true.
I would have thought that it was not in the best interests of either journalism or democracy that newspapers should go along and pay and make bids of enormous sums to convicted criminals or to call girls. This is utterly wrong. It's degrading the profession. It degrades democracy.
Successive governments have learned a hell of a lot from the way in which McKellern lost control of his situation during the Profumo scandal, and now successive governments, whether they be socialist or Tory, do know how to sort of damage control the situation. They are, I think, a little more open, and if the proverbial what's the name hits the fan, I've no doubt that the particular Prime Minister, whichever government it is, says, right, let's try and be sensible about this, but let's not, you know, and find out the facts and then give some of the facts out. Not necessarily all of them, but they certainly don't do the, you know, the old ostrich act that McMillan did.
McMillan's belated attempt at damage control was to set up the inquiry of Lord Denning.
He was under great pressure to produce a quick report that would help allay further public alarm over the whole matter. I mean, the trial was meant to do that, but then when Ward very inconveniently killed himself before the trial was quite over, the public, if anything, became a little more apprehensive about what had been occurring. And the Denning report was meant to put the final curtain over the whole sordid affair.
The heart of London, 20 minutes after midnight. At the stationery office in Kingsway, crowds queuing up for the verdict on the biggest public scandal of our time.
7 and 6, a copy of the Denning report, and now the contents can be made public.
He did it under great pressure of time. I know from people I interviewed on his staff that he was unable to see all the witnesses who'd appeared in the trial. His brief was very limited to look at the security aspects. He was not allowed to examine, for example, whether Ward was properly tried, why Ward killed himself. He could not go into any great detail about the whole matter. And if you ask my opinion of the report, I would say it was a whitewash.
The Securities Service covered security interests fully and reported to those concerned. Though Lord Denning described Stephen Ward as a communist sympathizer, and so much under the influence of the Soviet embassy official, Captain Ivanov, that he was a potential danger.
New books published in the last 2 years based on research for the unmade television projects and Scandal suggest the evidence presented by the Security Service to Lord Denning was less than complete. The authors argue that throughout the whole affair, MI5 were in fact engaged in an intelligence exercise known as honey trap.
Honey trap is an intelligence term. It's a very simple operation. Basically, MI5 wanted to entrap Ivanov through sex. They were hoping to blackmail him and eventually hoping that he would defect.
And they needed somebody to show him the bright lights of London, to win his confidence, and then to either to persuade him or blackmail him into defecting.
Who is the obscure Russian sailor who helped to bring the British government to the brink of shabby disaster? Who is this Captain Second Rank Yevgenia M. Ivanov, one-time assistant naval attaché at the Soviet embassy, known to his friends as Joanne, and whose surname was commonly anglicized to Ivanov?
The head of MI5, Sir Roger Hollis, omitted to tell Lord Denning of the full background towards unlikely friendship with Ivanov. How did they meet at a time when Russian diplomats in London rarely ventured outside the embassy walls?
Sir Colin Coote, editor of the Daily Telegraph, invited him to lunch at the Garrick Club. At the lunch, Ivanov met Sir Colin's doctor, Stephen Ward.
Colin Coote, the then editor of the Daily Telegraph, introduced them. The only thing that worries me slightly about that is that Colin Coote had known intelligence contacts. Now, if he didn't have those known intelligence contacts, one would take the whole thing as being purely accidental and a social affair. On the other hand, it may well be that that Coote was acting on behalf of MI5 and that he was doing this as a favour to them, to bring the two men together.
This luncheon at which he met Ward altered completely Ivanov's London life. With Ward, he led the life of a man about town, visiting clubs in the West End.
Your friend, Ivanov, a naval chappie.
Is he a spy?
No idea. What do you think?
It crossed my mind.
Talk. Discuss things. Exchange views.
I'm a curious fellow, Mr. Woods. Insatiable in my way. Always interested in the other fellow's point of view.
You know a lot of people. A lot of young women. Has he ever asked you a favor?
Took a copy of Lady Chatterley's Lover.
If he should ask a favor, Anything at all?
I'll let you know.
Do.
Well, we spoke, my researcher and I and the team working on the book, spoke to the MI5 officer, who was his case officer at the time. And he said, yes, I engaged Ward. It seemed to be a good idea at the time. He was working for us. We couldn't say so at the time of the trial because to have done so would have involved MI5 in a very nasty scandal.
Mr. Woods? Ward. Stephen Ward. I've just spent the most enjoyable weekend.
We now know that MI5 knew shortly after the famous weekend at Clifton. They knew that it was actually a sexual relationship. They had Stephen Ward for a main source for that, and as he reveals in his autobiography, Christine had given him intimate details of the liaison with John Profumo. He informed Mr. Woods of MI5 of all the details. Ward was a very patriotic gentleman, and he was cooperating with MI5. He was under their instructions. Now, they claimed to Lord Denning that they didn't actually know until January 1963.
Hello? Just one moment, please. A Dr. Ward. I'm terribly sorry. There's nobody here by that name. Yes, quite sure. Goodbye.
So when poor old Ward tried to convince the police and the court that he was actually working for MI5 and everything that he had to do with Ivanov was done from patriotic motives to help his country, they said, well, who engaged you? And he said, Mr. Woods in the War Office. And inquiries were made and there was no such person as Mr. Woods in the War Office. Of course not, because the MI5 officer who recruited him was using a pseudonym, using one of his many names, and it was only as recently as 6 or 7 years ago that may be stricken a little bit by conscience over this, that the MI5 officer and his superior were prepared to admit that they had indeed recruited Ward, and that if only they'd been able to speak out at the time, the man might still be alive. Terrible admission they have to make.
I think if we now look back at it, we should forget the triangular relationship between Ivanov, Profumo and Keeler and the passing of secrets, and look at the cover-up. That's the real core issue. MI5 were lying. And the thing that comes out of that is the political masters had no control over the security service.
I saw all those members of the security service. I saw Sir Roger Hollis himself, who's since been accused of being a traitor. I saw him. I saw his deputy. I assessed, and other members of the security service. I assessed their evidence to the best of my ability, and I accepted it. I may have been wrong. I may not have been right in my assessment, but it is my job to assess it. And I did assess it. And I assessed it by saying that, in my opinion, what Sir Roger Hollis told me was the truth. And that's all I had to do.
But for those who wish to re-examine the past, are official records any more open today than they were then?
Under the new proposed Official Secrets Act, investigative journalism would have a very difficult time. Let's imagine a situation where a similar affair arose again. Now, we wouldn't be able to use intelligence sources which were used in the book. That would be illegal. It's probable that we wouldn't be able to use some of the documents that we obtained from the American Freedom of Information Act, and I understand some of those documents have already been trawled back into the archives. And it's also the case, I think, that the Denning report wouldn't be able to come out in the form that it was, because it contains original MI5 documents and statements from intelligence officers. So we'd be back into the situation of 1963. We just wouldn't know what really went on.
Come on, baby, let's do the twist. Come on, baby, let's do the twist. Take me by my little hand and go like this.
very concerned about who owns history. There seems to be this belief that somehow there is a truth and an untruth, a reality and an unreality. And of course it's all perspective. Your victory is my defeat. And therefore, these things can be examined and should be examined.
But there's certainly nothing wrong with the re-examination of one's past-through film. That's an important aspect of filmmaking.
Absolutely.
I mean, whether it's pure nostalgia or whether it's political analysis, you know, I think it's vital, and one has a responsibility to, as filmmakers, to re-examine the past and to put a perspective on it.
And it's been a very long time now, and it's hard not to believe that there is something that we're not being told about it. Too many people tried to do the project. Too many people were stopped from doing it. Why? The BBC was stopped. I was stopped. Central was stopped. All sorts of people were stopped. Why? It does seem strange. And it makes you wonder what else we're not allowed. Well, we all know we're not allowed to examine anything at all now. It's very sad because it's very important that people do have a better understanding of their own history, and television is a perfect medium to do it. Perfect.
I think we're on hiding to nothing, you know, really. I think you'll get people who say this is a scurrilous undertaking. You'll get people who are kind of conspiracy theorists who will say that we've gone soft on the politics. And you'll get people who think that there's going to be a lot of anal entry and so forth, saying there's not enough sex. So basically, I think nobody will like it and everybody will go and see it.
And it's a commentary on things in the media. That its eventual home is not on television, which I regret because it was written for television, is in the cinema. And I hope that is not a signal in our deregulated future that subjects that for political, commercial, or reasons of subjective sensitivity, the best scripts, the best stories will find their home in the cinema as opposed to the television screen. Because I'm of an old journalistic school which basically believes that if the truth is fit to print and within the law, print it.